Entering the Mayo Experience.
Mayo Experience. Mayo Experience. Mayo Experience. Experience.
Welcome to the Pat Mayo Experience, Week 13 DraftKings picks and preview. If you're looking for that cheat sheet, it'll be coming out on DK Playbook Thursday morning. Check the comment section and the description for links to everything, such as other shows, where to subscribe to the audio podcast, and links to all of the rankings for the week. That'll all get updated throughout the week, too. And I don't want to let you get away without remembering that 10 a.m. Eastern Time, DraftKings YouTube channel. You can go to my Facebook page, to Periscope, to Twitter, and watch the Sunday morning show. We're live, myself, The Cust, and Garion coming at you for an hour. Then we're taking viewer questions for another 30-plus minutes or so, depending on how many questions we get in the chat. Generally, we don't get around to it, but we do answer like 500 of them, and we try to make it as all-encompassing as possible. And you can get banned for life. That's always fun. People seem to enjoy that. Joining me on the show today, a member of the Twitch team, going out on his own, twitch.tv/Joe Holka. It is Joe Holka. What's up?
How are you doing, man? Been following your work for a long time. I'm surprised this is the first time we've kind of made this work, but I'm excited to talk some football with you.
I mean, you got the brick wall. Is that a real brick wall behind you? Because behind me, it's not a real brick wall. It's like foam.
Yeah, it's fake. I was doing the green screen thing for a little while, which was a lot more challenging than I originally thought. So I made the switch to this thing. Not sure if I'll keep it, but we'll see how it works.
Yeah, you get maybe like a 3D printout of something. Make some fake depth behind you. That's usually the move for these video things. Green screen is the absolute worst. I started on green screen. It takes like 4 times as long as everything else.
Yeah, I need your help, man. This is the kind of stuff that I wish I would have known like 3 weeks ago when I started doing this. I just was trying to battle through the green screen thing. It was just a complete disaster.
Hey, this is why Mayo Media Inc. is a legitimate company. It's incorporated in everything, here for people's online digital video consulting needs if they ever have any. One day I'll get a client, and it'll be terrific. But hey, we can move on from that. I do want to let everyone know to smash the like button, leave your DraftKings handle in the comment section, and tell me your favorite running back play below $4,500 for the Week 13 main slate. If you do that, you get into a draw for 20 DK bucks. I'll announce the winners live on Monday's show, 10 a.m. Eastern Time, with myself and the Athletic and Fantrax Chris Meany. So go check him out. And there's another giveaway all this week as well, that if you listen to the audio podcast, I always forget about the audio podcast listeners. And I love all of you audio podcast listeners. If you just go leave a review, whether it be iTunes, Stitcher, Spotify, doesn't matter where it is, you leave your DraftKings handle, a 5-star review, and say something nice about the show. Or just something nice about me. Or something like really mean towards Tim or Garion. Either way, you get in a draw for 20 DK bucks. Those winners will be announced on Monday's show as well. Let's hop right into the running backs show. At the very top of the pricing board this week, we just scroll up and we see, hey, there's the man himself, Todd Gurley. He's back. He is $9,300. McCaffrey, coming off the 50-point game, is $8,800 in a sweet matchup against Tampa Bay. You got Barkley, Hunt, David Johnson, Joe Mixon, Leonard Fournette, and Nick Chubb. That's your $7,000 and above area. For tournament play on the main slate, do we just roll out McCaffrey again?
Yeah, I think it's a solid play for sure. I mean, after what he did last week, he's just the perfect DraftKings player as far as at the running back position. Like, I think one thing that I think people need to continue to prioritize is looking at some of these running backs with the upside of a wide receiver. It could be a year or two, could be even next year. We see some of these guys are well above 10K because that's basically what their role is. So Christian McCaffrey, I don't really think it's too chasey, to be completely honest. We've been targeting running backs against Tampa Bay this entire year. As far as the game and pace perspective, it sets up really well always against Tampa Bay because they like to ramp up the pace a little bit. As far as like the kind of outside metrics, we do expect to see him with a huge impact in the passing game yet again. So 8,800, kind of building your teams around there is definitely, I think, is a solid way to build from the top end.
I would imagine that most people are along the same line of thought this week in terms of Christian McCaffrey, especially with the recency bias of the gigantic week last week. Everyone who didn't take him feels really burned by it, and they don't want to miss out again. And expecting 50 DraftKings points from anyone is kind of ludicrous. Although, like you mentioned, Christian McCaffrey is the type of player that can get there if things do break his way. But getting 100 yards rushing and 100 yards receiving, not the most likely of outcomes, although it does happen from time to time. Banking on that, never a good idea. But even at a chalk, like, what would have to be the chalk for you to fade Christian McCaffrey? Because I could see him being like 25%, and frankly, I don't think that's high enough.
Yeah, if he ends up being around 25%, I still think he's a guy you have to prioritize in tournaments and cash games. Like, not too worried about the ownership thing at running back. I mean, I think trying to get up to two of these running backs always seems to make a lot of sense. The problem, again, this week, like last week, there's a ton of value down there that's super important to look at as far as what touches they're going to see. We got some guys even under 4K to fire at this week, so we'll have to talk about them as well. I mean, but Todd Gurley at 9,300, I do have some concerns with pace in this game. They are at Detroit, but it's a massive kind of advantage for the Rams at the line of scrimmage against Detroit, just in run blocking. So really like Todd Gurley, and it's in a game where they're double-digit favorites at this time and a massive team total, second highest only to Kansas City. So Todd Gurley at 9,300. Maybe that's what went wrong for me last week is I couldn't get jamming Gurley like I do every week.
So I would still prioritize McCaffrey over Gurley, and getting up to both them in lineups is going to be super tough. But how much better is Gurley than, let's say, Kareem Hunt, who's almost $2,000 cheaper? And they're, like you mentioned, the highest team total on the slate, gigantic favorites, although it is on the road. But this seems like a spot where you can just smash the Oakland Raiders on the ground.
Yeah, I mean, I love Hunt. The problem with Gurley is, can you really prioritize him at 9,300 when we do have Hunt in this massive total at 7,800? I do have some concerns with Hunt. It's kind of the same story that we've had the whole year. His passing game involvement has been sporadic at best. But one thing that I will say about Kansas City is, and Andy Reid teams in general have always been really good coming out of the bye. And this Oakland team is just horrendous. They've basically given up. The problem with this might even be that they get out so far ahead that they end up kind of scaling back some of their starters. So that'd be one of my bigger concerns with this KC offense in general. But yeah, massive total, 35.25 implied total to start the week. Definitely going to be a super important game to get right. But yeah, so I think Kareem Hunt's right there at 7,800.
So those are the three guys. I mean, Barkley going up against Chicago. You can never really count out Barkley because the volume is going to be there. Although this does seem like a spot, despite the fact that he's going up against a number one run defense, that he could pile up like close to 10 catches here. If they legit can't get anything going on the ground, that it could just be dump off city.
Yeah, I like Saquon. I mean, my biggest problem with Saquon is always this offensive line, but in some ways it kind of helps his passing game involvement. So I think he's interesting at 7,900. I don't think this is a guy we're going to see a discount on very often as far as his price. So definitely interested in that side of things. I think that this Giants offensive line is really going to struggle to protect Eli per usual. And he's shown that he's totally willing to just throw dump offs to Saquon. And the upside that this guy has as far as breaking big plays has been unlike almost any running back in the entire league this year. So definitely think Saquon squarely in play. It's a little bit tougher with kind of a lower implied total. They are on the road as underdogs. But yeah, in tournaments, Saquon at 7,900, you at least know the volume's going to be there.
So if we're constructing lineups and we want to have Christian McCaffrey, and let's say I'm playing 10 lineups, should I just go all in on McCaffrey? Let's say 7 of 10 lineups, 8 of 10 lineups, or should I look at a diversify and get some shares of Barkley in tournament play, or just say, screw it, I just want to go with McCaffrey. I think he's a better play objectively than Barkley this week, so just give me him instead.
I think taking a stand is always what you want to do in tournaments like that. So I have no problem if you want to really kind of commit to the McCaffrey play. I think anytime you really start to hedge some of these plays, you can hedge yourself into mediocrity, to be completely honest. So I think it's fine to go definitely overweight on McCaffrey. So if we project him around 25-30%, depending on what tournament you're playing, maybe you get that to like 60 or so and kind of differentiate elsewhere. But these elite running backs, you definitely want to have a piece of some of these high-end guys. So if you want to sprinkle in some Saquon, I don't have any problem with that.
So all the guys below Hunt, the top 4 plays on the board are pretty legit. And then afterwards, you have guys who get volume but aren't the most consistent week to week. You got David Johnson, Mixon, Chubb. Chubb has been fantastic, just a bad matchup against Houston on the ground. Aaron Jones, James White with the return of Rex Burkhead potentially, Dalvin Cook, Sony Michel. Did those guys at all interest you? Like Aaron Jones seems like he's in a really good spot here.
Yeah, this is the range that I haven't really been able to make it to so far, like early in the week in lineup construction. I'm trying to prioritize at least one of these really high price guys and then go all the way down for some guys around the 4,500, even lower range. So this mid-range definitely makes some sense. I think that the one thing that does stand in favor of Chubb is always the pace that Cleveland plays at, and he has seen a lot more involvement in the passing game as of recent weeks. So, I mean, at 7K, his price is a lot different than he was even the last couple of weeks. But, I mean, this guy's going to continue to touch the ball 22 to 25 times, which puts him in this range that we were just talking about of how many touches this guy's going to see. So it is a really tough matchup on the ground, of course. And But one thing that I will say in his favor is that Houston has been number 1 in the league against running backs in the passing game per DVOA. So if that kind of slows down any involvement that Duke may have had, I could see Chubb having kind of the better game on the ground. And I definitely think this team wants to run a little bit.
I still think that I like Aaron Jones' gigantic favorites at home against Arizona a little bit more. I just don't know. I don't know, because I would generally turn to David Johnson here because I feel like his involvement in the passing game would really prop him up. But I don't know how much time Josh Rosen's really going to have in the pocket here, even for dump offs, to let, even if you split out, let's say, David Johnson wide and you get him involved in the passing game that way, or run design screens to him. The one thing that Green Bay can still do on defense is get to the passer. And we've seen with Rosen that if you can get in his face, he's just a disaster.
Oh yeah, between those two guys, definitely prefer Aaron Jones for a lot of the reasons you stated. I mean, massive home favorite, so you would think that the game script's definitely going to be in his favor. And yeah, we talked about how Saquon can kind of get these dump offs with behind this bad offensive line, but it's kind of a different argument for me, in my opinion, with Josh Rosen, just because of like they haven't shown the ability to use them in the same way that they've used Saquon. Like Saquon's legitimately getting schemed routes in the passing game. And DJ hasn't really seen that a ton. So I think that it's a totally different situation. I'm with you on Aaron Jones over DJ, but did want to mention Chubb because he's been so good lately.
Dalvin Cook played just under 60% of the snaps on Sunday in the Sunday night game against Green Bay, 59%. Although I think that this is a better matchup for him against a slower Patriots defense. No one's really going to go to Dalvin Cook because there are just better options on the board. But it's just funny because he's stuck right in there. He's the one who's going to be involved in the passing game. If you don't think that Latavius Murray is going to pilfer away his goal line carries, I think that he's an interesting contrarian play for this range. If you think that he can get his snaps back up 65, 70%, and this game becomes a shootout because you use his speed, his east-west running ability instead of like the north-south smash-mouth football that Latavius Murray brings, that I think that Dalvin Cook is in play here. I don't know really what I want to do with him or how I can utilize him. Do you have any specific thoughts on this Vikings running game against the Patriots?
Yeah, so just looking at the range that he's in, I think you can get a similar touch floor from a lot of guys. Lamar Miller, I think even some of these other guys that we'll talk about that are a little bit cheaper. Like, I think that this game is super interesting to kind of look at because I think the pace sets up really well, especially on the Minnesota side of the ball. I think there's going to be a ton of plays. I do like that there's a really condensed target share and a really tough matchup for Diggs, which I'm sure we'll talk about at wide receiver. But Cook in particular at 6,200 is not one that I'm really on. Pretty low team total on the road. I think if they start to use him in the passing game, I might have a little bit more kind of interest there, but I think there's better spots at running back for sure, even in tournaments.
Okay, so in the $5,000 range, when we scroll down a little bit, you have Sony Michel, Matt Breida, Tariq Cohen, Phillip Lindsay, who has really taken control of this backfield. Kerryon Johnson, I'm guessing he's going to end up coming back to play. I don't know as of yet, obviously. He's super dicey as we speak right now on a Wednesday. But let's say Kerryon Johnson is active. Do you think that because Bruce Ellington is now playing the slot, you're not seeing Theo Riddick get split out wide anymore and seeing both of them on the field at the same time, that Kerryon would have enough volume to make an impact against the Rams, against a team that's probably going to be in prevent defense most of this game?
Yeah, so this game is interesting because at least we have a lot of efficiency on the Rams side of the ball, but Detroit really wants to slow things down. I put a lot of weight into game environment, and I don't know how great the game environment would be for Kerryon, even if he isn't super involved. So I'm not really on that given his price and what other value that we have. And you mentioned the Ellington concerns, at least with Riddick being used in the passing game a little bit more, kind of in that slot role. It's something to consider with all of these Detroit backs. And it's kind of a muddy situation that I don't really want to go near.
All right. So what about those other guys? Cohen, Breida, and who's the other one? Phillip Lindsay, Chris Carson, you can throw into that mix. Marlon Mack, if he plays against Jacksonville, he's still in concussion protocol as we speak right now. And then there's Dion Lewis up against the Jets, who I guess when they can't run the ball, although you can run the ball, as we saw last week against the Jets, that all of a sudden Dion Lewis could end up with 7 catches. So this range and that $6,000 range, again, I find them super confusing because they don't allow you the value in the price discount and the break that you get from some of these super cheap running backs. But generally when that happens, that means these guys go wildly under-owned.
Oh, yeah. Phillip Lindsay is by far my favorite play in this range, 5,400. I think he's going to end up being super chalky in this game. Pretty decent team total from Denver relative to kind of what they've had lately. They are slight favorites in this game. But the thing that really stands out for me always against Cincinnati is 32nd in the league at defending running backs in the passing game. I think that Lindsey is a really solid player in general from a talent perspective. I think there's a chance that he has a really good game. This game, as far as the Denver side of things, actually is projecting for the most offensive plays on the slate. And the third highest game in ton of plays as well. Massive in favor at the line of scrimmage for running backs for Denver. So, I think Philip Lindsay is a phenomenal play.
Okay, so below $5,000, you've been talking about these sort of discount guys. You see LaShawn McCoy at 49, Gus Edwards at 48. Gus Edwards going up against Atlanta. The big talk has always been, hey, to attack Atlanta through pass-catching running backs. And Gus Edwards does not catch the ball at all through the air. He's the Gus Bus. He only makes one stop, and it's always on the ground. Do we go to Gus Edwards here? Or do we go even lower in the pricing scheme to make sure that we can get maximum value? Like, who are your favorite guys from down here? Like, are you someone who's going to roll out Carlos Hyde at 33?
Yeah, so a couple of guys we mentioned, Gus Edwards versus Lamar Miller, I think is really interesting because both of these teams are super run heavy, at least over the past 3 games. Baltimore, third most run heavy team, Houston, fourth most run heavy team. So I think that they're both super interesting. I hate the Lamar play in general, but it is a massive run funnel situation for Houston against Cleveland, who's been pretty good against the pass this year. Again, I mentioned how much I like Cleveland just for speeding the pace up of games. It's a really strong kind of game environment for Lamar Miller. Even if he gets his 15 to 20 touches, hopefully ends up on the higher side of that because they are 6-point favorites at home. 4,600 for a guy like that is I do prefer him over Gus Edwards. I think if we kind of move down a little bit, like we talked about, I do think that Carlos Hyde is super interesting. This is a team that has gone a little bit more pass heavy when they don't have Fournette in the past. So it's not a great matchup against this Indy team on the ground. But if they do use Yeldon or Hyde in the passing game, 30th in DVOA defending running backs in the passing game, and another really strong game environment, 4th highest pace on the slate. So I do think that given Hyde's price at 3,300, he's probably the guy I'm leaning towards, and he does really open up a ton in lineup construction.
We don't generally talk about cash games on this show, but would you play Carlos Hyde 3,300 in a cash game lineup, or is there too much volatility in his workload that just all of a sudden TJ Yeldon's on the field for 80% of the snaps because they pass the entire time, and then you get absolutely nothing from Carlos Hyde?
Yeah, I think the question you always have to kind of ask yourself if you're going to pay all the way down is what does it allow you to do to the rest of your lineup? So there's some really good spots at the high end at wide receiver, which we'll touch on as well. But if it allows you to get a lineup that has Saquon, McCaffrey, or Gurley McCaffrey, I definitely think you can afford to kind of take a chance. But that said, these running back slots, even the flex spot, of course, is so valuable because there's such a high floor and ceiling from some of these elite running backs that have pass catching ability that just totally punting one off seems bad in some ways. But for me, it depends on the rest of your roster. If it allows you to get in some of these other studs, I definitely think it's fine.
Below $4,000, the only one that really sticks out to me, because you can just use him almost any week that Jameis Winston starts at quarterback, the highest implied game total on the slate, 55.5 right now. Peyton Barber just continues to get it done. The only concern here would be that we see a little bit what we saw last week, that when they went pass heavy, a lot of Jaquiz Rodgers on the field over Peyton Barber. Peyton Barber still got there. It was not an efficient game, but he found the end zone. He's the one who's going to get these goal line touches, and he's $3,700 almost like every single week, and he pays off that price more often than not.
Yeah, I've been struggling with the Peyton Barber play like the whole year. He's never a guy that I really land on just because of how much this team wants to throw, but it is a pretty terrible matchup against Carolina, who's been pretty good in the run game. But I do really like the game environment for plays. And again, if he gets a touchdown for you at 3,700, I think he's fine. But yeah, the kind of matchup of the line of scrimmage is terrible. If he gets his 15 touches, he could end up being fine, but I definitely don't think he has much of a ceiling at 3,700, but he'll probably go lower owned than some of these other guys we talked about in this range.
Well, if we just go up a few $100, $300 to be exactly, I hate Jordan Howard. He's just absolutely confuddling to me. Like, I can't figure out what's going on with him anyway. The one thing I do know is the Giants have a horrific run defense, especially so since they got rid of Damon Harrison. So can you use Jordan Howard here at $4,000? Is this the game where he gets his 16 carries for 55 yards and 2 touchdowns? Almost a lot like that Bills game from earlier this year.
Yeah, this one's probably not for me. I probably have a lot of biases away from Jordan Howard in general, just as a player. I mean, some things definitely make sense. I mean, at 4K, if he touches the ball 16, 17 times, I think he's fine. They are slight favorites in this game on the road. Yeah, I think there's better spots. Jordan Howard at 4K. But this range is just super interesting, like this cheap range, even below 5K, that you might even get some lower. The ownership might be spread out quite a bit, even if we end up kind of going towards some of the guys like Gus and Lamar Miller, who I expect to be really popular.
Listen, if those two guys are super popular, I have no problems fading them and either paying down or paying slightly more for your like mid $5,000 guys. But the last one, we don't know about Marlon Mack's status as of yet. He has not passed concussion protocol as of Wednesday, which would leave Nyheim Hines and Jordan Wilkins as potential plays. I think that Hines is probably the better play of the two. If Mack sits and he's officially ruled out, which is something we're probably not going to know until later in the week, which means you're not going to get a ton of ownership on either one of these guys. That is Hines someone you would go to?
Man, I like I said, I really try and prioritize volume and floor at this position and ceiling though. So I think that Hines, his involvement in the passing game is somewhat intriguing, but I'm not really sure what this Indy team is going to do without Mac, I guess, because they've been so much more run heavy over the past few weeks than they have in the past. So when Nyheim Hines was having some of these really great games, it was when the Colts were really pass heavy. So I'm not sure that that's exactly what's going to happen. I'm not really trying to get all the way down to this range and really attack a situation that I think is kind of tough to peg.
Okay, wide receivers. Let's start at the very top. Tyreek Hill comes in at $9,100. Any sort of concern that you had in terms of Kareem Hunt if this game gets a bit out of control, does that apply to Tyreek Hill as well?
Definitely. The thing with Tyreek Hill is I don't think there's anyone on Oakland that can even come close to stopping him. So, I mean, he could have one of those games where the efficiency goes off. He has 2 touchdowns in the first half, and it doesn't really matter if he plays the second half. Like, that's the kind of talent this guy is. And Oakland's pretty much given up. So at 9,100, I don't know if it's a play that I'll make it to myself, just because the price discount you get moving down to Thielen for 1,100 cheaper, I think is something that's more my speed. But yeah, like Tyreek Hill is a guy that has absolutely buried me with his efficiency kind of in the past without volume, but he's been getting a lot more volume this year. So as far as his weighted opportunity rating, 7th highest on the slate. I'm at 9,100. You'd like that to be a little bit higher, but the upside is massive.
So below Tyreek Hill, DeAndre Hopkins is in the $8,000 range. So is Mike Evans. You mentioned Adam Thielen. He is $8,000 right on the dot. And then below, in the $7,000 range, when we look at these receivers, you have Devontae Adams, Odell Beckham, Julio Jones. 3 not great matchups for the 3 of those guys. Stefan Diggs, you mentioned that a little bit earlier. AJ Green's like angling to play this week, so we'll see if he gets in or not. Then you have Julian Edelman, then the Rams guys. Then probably I don't know if he's the best play on the slate, but Kenny Golladay at $6,700 seems, if you want to talk about floor, potential upside, even though Detroit plays a slower pace, without Marvin Jones around, he's now on IR, you can probably just pencil him into at least 10 targets and work on from there and see how it goes, can't you?
Oh, yeah. Ton to unpack there, honestly. But starting kind of with Kenny Golladay, I mentioned weighted opportunity rating. So 6,700, top 4 on the slate over the last 4 games. So his volume has been just crazy. He does have a pretty decent matchup against Troy Hill as well. So I think that he's a really good price play. The problem is the Rams are a pretty heavy funnel towards the run. So I do have some concerns there with pace, specifically on the Detroit side of the ball. But if you're going to fire at one of these Detroit wide receivers, definitely think that Golladay is your guy. You mentioned DeAndre Hopkins at the top, towards the top at least. I have a ton of concerns with DeAndre Hopkins. So one thing that I do always want to kind of touch on with him is people want to talk about what his splits are with Deshaun Watson, but the bigger split has always been if Fuller is in the game or not. He just opens up so much for DeAndre Hopkins with kind of his breaking speed down the field. And I don't think Demaryius Thomas has that same type of effect for DeAndre Hopkins. So this Houston team really wants to run. So, I mean, that's part of the reason I do really like Lamar Miller as well, because I don't think that Houston's going to be able to pass very well against Cleveland. Cleveland's at the line of scrimmage. I think that it's a really tough matchup for Watson again. So Hopkins is one that I'm really trying to avoid at the top end. I definitely prefer Adam Thielen's. I do think that Stefan Diggs at 7,600 is super interesting in tournaments because I think people will kind of steer clear of him against Stephon Gilmore. And I do really try and not weight the cornerback matchups extremely high. So I do think that in general, Thielen's nice for if he gets a little bit of a usage bump. And this Minnesota team in general is just so nice for kind of a condensed target share. So at 8K, Thielen is the guy that I think I'm really trying to prioritize if I don't make it all the way up to Tyreek.
If you didn't want to pay to the very top of wide receiver, do you think it's feasible that you start your teams Kenny Golladay and Emmanuel Sanders at receiver? And that way you can probably jam in one of the top end running backs and potentially two if you pay down at other positions?
Yeah, I love Sanders at 6,300. He was super underpriced last week. I think he was like 5,500 last week. So for his target share and upside, I really like Sanders as well. Sanders and Golladay. So like this mid range is really solid. I mentioned that I think a lot of people, as far as roster construction, I think a lot of people are going to try and pay down at running back, at least at two of their slots this week, to try and get up to some of these elite wide receivers, but also this mid range away from the cheaper range, because I don't think that the cheaper range is that nice at wide receiver this week. So even throw in kind of the Corey Davis as far as his volume is concerned at 5,500 is kind of interesting to me. The game environment is not great against the Jets with the lower total, and they are pretty big favorites. So I think that he's another guy that stands out, at least from a volume perspective.
Would you go Corey Davis or DJ Moore if you expect Devin Funchess to sit again?
Yeah, that's a tough one. I think it's Corey Davis for me based on volume alone, but DJ Moore has been just absolutely balling lately. And I do think that Cam Newton, if you're trying to pair him with McCaffrey, of course, but if you need another guy, I definitely think DJ Moore is right there. I think Cam Newton's going to end up being one of the most popular quarterbacks again this week. And DJ Moore gives you a little bit of savings, but as far as his opportunity, it's been really strong over the past few weeks, and people that have kind of gone back to that well have it's paid off for him.
Jarvis Landry, $5,300. It seems a bit low, but he's been awful. So maybe it seems a bit high to some people. But if you can get the volume back for him, and someone pointed this out to me the other day, I believe it was Garrett on the ranking show, that when you look at the Texans' defense, at least pass defense, they look really good on paper and have been limiting quarterbacks and limiting wide receivers, but they actually haven't played anyone good. That maybe if Baker comes in, it doesn't make a difference that Jarvis Landry can get it going again. Do you bite on his price being this low at this point?
Oh my God. So this Jarvis Landry guy has just buried me so many times this year, but I'm going to try and look at it somewhat objectively. So he is 5,300. It's a lower price than we've seen from him in quite some time. Yeah, so this Houston team hasn't seen a lot lately. I am concerned with his target share lately, only 22% target share over the last 4 games. His weighted opportunity rating is way down as well. So I think maybe his price is back to where it kind of should be. But as soon as everyone's kind of jumping off of this train, it's probably the time to get back on. A guy that's shown a lot of volume in the past. I don't know if the upside is there. In this game in particular, I definitely think that he's in play, but definitely not going to be a core play for me.
So below $4,500 at receiver, do you have a single favorite play, 2 or 3 guys you want to mix in? Because I'm just staring at Marcel Aitman at $3,600 and thinking, I can do that.
Yeah, he's the top value in my model right now, and it terrifies me. But there's a lot of things that definitely go in his favor at 3,600, like you said. If you get 10 points from this guy, from a roster construction standpoint, I would prefer to take a shot on a really cheap wide receiver than a really cheap running back, just because of from a roster construction spot, I would just prefer to spend more at running back and kind of lock in that floor. So, I mean, even if you get a goose egg, maybe 5 points from Marcel Aitman, it's 3,600. It really doesn't matter for most of your lineup unless one of these other cheap guys really goes off. I don't really love any of the cheap wide receivers. So I'm really trying to get away from this range if possible. I think Bruce Ellington is at least interesting at 3,500 if he does continue to see more of the Theo Riddick type targets against LA. At least that's a somewhat decent spot if you do want to attack kind of at least some lower ADOT targets and really just kind of try and soak something up at 3,500. But outside of that, you can probably make an argument for Adam Humphries at 4,200. But those are the 3 wide receivers that I'm looking at, and it's pretty terrifying when you get under 4K for sure.
I think that if you look at $3,900, there's 2 guys in the same game that you could potentially throw out there. Because if Deshaun Jackson doesn't play, I think that Chris Godwin at 3,900 becomes a really intriguing option in a game that is expected to shoot at. Then on the other side of the ball, if there is no Devin Funchess, everyone's going to be really enamored with DJ Moore. But like Curtis Samuel's been really good.
Yeah, I think that in particular, the one that you said, Chris Godwin, stands out to me. If you're really trying to get away from these like low ADOT guys that have a super low ceiling, Godwin at least has a specific role at the goal line for a team that we think is going to score a lot of points, or in the red zone rather. So I think that even if he doesn't run a ton of routes, that his routes are high equity routes because of where they're trying to scheme him the ball. So his price at 3,900, I definitely think is interesting in this game. So he'd probably be my favorite outside of Aitman. Yeah, but you mentioned that kind of the other side of that Carolina game. It's tough. I honestly, I think it's pretty thin, to be honest, compared to these other guys, but he's a pretty decent player as well. So maybe he doesn't need a ton of touches really to go off. And at that price point, you can't really argue with that upside.
Well, especially if Torrey Smith is still gimped up a little bit, and then Greg Olson's still just an old man, and if you have no Devin Funchess, that you could see a higher target share for Curtis Samuel, and then they just run a lot of like gadget plays for him as well to get him into open space to utilize that speed. So he can be a game breaker in that sense that he's so fast that if he does score a touchdown, I know he found one in close last week, which is just terrific, but it's almost the same mentality that a lot of people always use with John Ross. Be like, well, if John Ross is going to score a touchdown, it's going to be an 85-yard touchdown. Then all of a sudden he scored a 3-yard touchdown, which is great if you end up using him. And just finding the end zone is all you really want from one of these guys down here. But the big play potential for Curtis Samuel, I think, could go a long way.
Nothing was worse than this week where everyone was just all in on Cam Newton. And then I think we got a fullback touchdown. We got a rushing touchdown from Curtis Samuel, basically running completely horribly on that play. So, yeah, I mean, I think Curtis Samuel, you mentioned the gadget plays, but just if they continue to like hand him the ball, like those touches are really valuable, especially breaks off like a 15 to 20 yard run. That kind of yardage is something that is super important, especially for a guy that you're getting at 3,900. And he's got that gadget play that a lot of these other guys that we're talking about in this range don't have. So I'm with you as far as the upside for sure.
Any Jets receivers on your radar?
Man, probably not. I really struggle with the Jets in general. I hate this game. Like the only guy that I'm really kind of dialed into a little bit is Corey Davis based on his price and his volume. But if there's a Jets guy that makes sense to me, I guess you can make an argument for Quincy Enunwa at 4,100. But I definitely prefer all these other cheap guys that we've mentioned.
I'm usually a big Jermaine Kearse backer, but I think that if Robbie Anderson played last week, he didn't look 100% by any means, but give him another week on that ankle, he could be fine. And if he ends up matched up against Malcolm Butler, he could burn him like 5 times in this game.
You sure you want to tell people that you're a Jermaine Kearse backer?
I've been on this show as someone who once recommended to pick him, use your number one waiver priority on Jermaine Kearse. That didn't turn out well at all.
Hey, I played him this year when he was seeing. I can't remember which game it was. It was a great matchup in the slot. Ended up with a goose egg. So I've played him. Maybe I have some biases away from him after that game. But one thing I will say for these Jets guys, they've been the third highest pass volume team in the entire league as far as their percentage of plays over the past 3 games. It is a massive pass funnel for Tennessee. So if you really want to take a chance on some of these guys, I think Kearse is fine. He's the guy that's seeing the most volume for sure. His weighted opportunity rating is pretty solid relative to his price point. So I might take that back a little bit. I think that Kearse is fine.
Yeah, see, then now that we've talked people onto Kearse, pivot on to Robbie Anderson, you'll get your 270-yard touchdowns and you'll win all the money. That's the move. Like Dolphins receivers, Bills receivers, any interest in these guys?
Yeah, probably not. I really think that game environment is super important, and those are the ones that I'm not really attacking. This total in Miami and Buffalo is pretty hilarious, honestly. I think it's setting at 40 is the over-under right now, and that's probably even a little bit high relative to these two teams. So not super interested.
Last one. If A.J. Green plays, would you have any interest in him? And if A.J. Green doesn't play, does that get you onto Boyd or potentially John Ross?
I actually think I like Boyd more if AJ Green plays, just because when he was just shredding earlier in the year, it's because of how much attention that AJ Green does draw. So I think that Boyd is an interesting one, at least. So his price point, I guess it is not super easy to get to, but 6,100 is kind of a dead range, like the Emmanuel Sanders range. I think that he's a really solid pivot from Emmanuel Sanders, especially if AJ Green does play. John Ross is an interesting one. We talked about him before as a guy that can definitely break a big play against this Denver team. It's not a fantastic matchup by any means, but since he's been super pass heavy, so I definitely think that he's at least in play at 3,900 surrounding some of these other guys we've mentioned down there.
Quarterbacks, where are you starting?
Quarterbacks, I think that you have to kind of start at the top and talk about Patrick Mahomes. I do think that it sets up really well for points. There's a lot of concerns, blowout concerns, but if Oakland can just be not completely terrible, then it might look good paying all the way up for Patrick Mahomes with the value that we do have. As far as his yards per attempt, highest in the league, at least top three this year. And that's one of the efficiency metrics that I really value at the quarterback position. Massive total. They are on the road, but at the line of scrimmage, Oakland, the team that plays Oakland always stands out to me as far as the quarterback, because he's going to have all the time in the world. Oakland just can't pressure. And the most important thing to me at the quarterback position is which quarterbacks are going to have time, which quarterbacks are not going to have time that tend to struggle under pressure. So none of those issues with Mahomes. I think that he's a guy that you could consider paying up for. I'm not sure what the ownership's going to be based on roster construction, but yeah, if you can get there, it might be worth it.
I think a lot of people will just pay down the $1,000 and just roll with Cam. But
Yep.
Every week that Jameis has started, I've used Jameis, and it only didn't work once. And frankly, even in that Cincinnati game, he didn't destroy you if you played him. He still had 35 pass attempts in that game. So if this is going to be the highest scoring game, at least projected, on the slate, like, why wouldn't you just use Jameis at 6,000?
Oh yeah, I love Jameis, and this is the Tampa Bay situation is probably one of my biggest regrets this season. Is it's hard for me to get a peg on who to pair him with in stacks usually, but if you've just been rolling this Tampa Bay quarterback, like, it's been kind of beaten to death how good they've been. But Winston in particular in this spot, it sets up really well. So I mean, they're a team that is at least in a spot where Carolina is a massive pass funnel. So I definitely think there's a chance they attack through the air. Jameis has been really solid this year. And I think there's going to be a ton of pass attempts in this game. I've got him projected for the most pass attempts on the entire slate right now. As a home underdog is something that I'm always kind of looking at too. I do believe that there's still a slight dog in this game, tight spread. So hopefully it's back and forth. I think that Winston is super interesting, especially if everyone's going to gravitate towards Cam.
Are you going to roll up my main man, Lamar Jackson? Because everyone loves Lamar Jackson.
I love Lamar Jackson as well. I mean,
he's $5,900. Could you just pay down for $5,300 and use discount Lamar Jackson, Josh Allen?
oh my God, is Josh Allen going to be a thing this week?
I don't know, but I mean, don't they kind of do exactly the same thing?
I think it's I don't know if we'll ever see Josh Allen have the 27 rush attempts hit the rushing bonus game, but Lamar
he had 90 rushing yards last week.
Yeah, that shows how much I've even really been looking at him. But
like
maybe
he's like he's a sneaky decent fan. Like, he's a sneaky good fantasy quarterback only because he has this rushing ability. He just basically shakes off Shady near the goal line and takes it in himself. And he still has this like rocket laser arm and can complete these 70-yard passes. Like, there's a lot of upside with Josh Allen. It could be an absolute disaster. I'm not going to pretend like Josh Allen's a great play, but the path to him scoring, like, he had 30 DK points last week.
I get it. I guess one of the biggest arguments, let's think back a couple of weeks when Lamar Jackson's price was super low. The biggest thing for me is how much faster pace Baltimore plays than Buffalo, and their implied total is always a lot higher. So like, I don't think I would ever, like, I'm more of a single entry pay up in stakes type player. So I don't think I'd ever land on a quarterback that is 17.5 points as far as their implied total, but I get it. Like, sometimes it doesn't matter at the quarterback position. Like these fantasy quarterbacks that it doesn't really matter how good of a real quarterback they are, especially if they use their legs. So Josh Allen definitely wasn't on my board, but if you're really trying to pay down for a similar type play to what Lamar Jackson's floor is, in my opinion, I think he's fine.
So you have Lamar Jackson, you have Josh Allen, Marcus Mariota's down at 5,200, but the one who's right in the middle, and he's not going to carry any ownership, only because we don't know if he's playing or not. But let's say that Mitch Trubisky plays at the Giants. This guy has been on 3 Millionaire Maker winning teams already this season, and now you can get him for $5,700 in a spot where no one's going to use him. Like, he's a guy who runs a ton. He has a great floor with his legs. He'll rush in a touchdown or two, and the Bears offense can just go bananas at any point. Like, it just seems to me like everyone's going to be on Lamar Jackson, and I don't know how much I trust the floor, but I just don't know if the upside's a real thing with him.
Oh yeah, I'm with you on Lamar too. Like, that's part of the reason I didn't play him on my main team last week, is because I think his floor is super safe, but his ceiling is a little bit questionable now that he's got the same price as a lot of these real quarterbacks, quote unquote. But yeah, Trubisky's interesting. If he does end up playing, no one's going to play him just because of those injury concerns. I love the Chicago defense for sure, but the main reason that I love them is because of kind of the line of scrimmage. But on the other side of it, it's almost as bad. So the Giants don't pressure at all. Chicago's offensive line has been really good at protecting. So I think that Trubisky's interesting. One thing that I would want to look into a little bit more is what were some of his matchups where he really had a blow up game on the ground? I want to see if those are teams that pressured a lot and kind of got him to get outside of the pocket, if that's really just more of a scheme thing for Trubisky. I guess that's the one thing I would still want to look into if I was considering him.
I feel like he had I'm trying to think, did he have the big rushing game or the big passing game against Tampa? I think that was the 6th passing touchdown game.
I think it was, yeah, and Tampa can't pressure at all.
So let's see here. Game logs for Mitchell Trubisky. He ran for 43 against the Vikings. He ran for 51 against the Jets. He ran for 81 against New England and 53 against Tampa. So it's actually teams that can't pressure. In that Minnesota game, I don't believe Everson Griffin was back for that. They didn't generate a lot of pressure in that game as a whole. So it's the non-pressure teams that he's been doing really well against.
I guess that makes some sense too, because if he ends up sitting back in the pocket for longer, doesn't see anything he likes downfield, he's a guy that's totally willing to just check it down and start running. So I think that that's something to think about when the Giants are definitely not going to get pressure, in my opinion, in this game. Trubisky is at least interesting at 5,700 relative to some of these other guys. I think Trubisky is more of the guy that you can consider as the running quarterback where everyone is going to be on Lamar.
Well, and even to kind of back up that point against pressure versus non-pressure, the 3 bad games where you had 6 yards, 8 yards, and where is the other one lumped in here? 18 yards on the ground. Detroit, Buffalo, and Arizona, 3 teams currently inside the top 10 in DVOA adjusted sack rate as well, and bringing pressure. So, yeah, if the Giants can't get to him, he might be taken off. I mean, I guess the injury concern would play a lot into it, but that's also the reason that you're getting the discount in price and the discount on ownership.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, I think that the people that have believed in kind of at least the scheme of this offense have really done well this year. Actually, that week where Bears fan, I can't remember his exact username on DraftKings, but won the Millie Maker. Actually, one of my best friends is from Chicago. I had to send him that and make sure it wasn't him that won all the money.
Would you ever do that in a Millionaire Maker?
Well, I'm a Cardinals fan, so it'd be a little bit more difficult to do that with a full onslaught of the Cardinals. But yeah, I mean, can't you just picture this guy, with the Bears fan or whatever his username was, sitting on his couch, hungover on a Sunday morning, just like, I'm just going to throw Bears onslaught out there and see what happens. And then he just wakes up from his nap and has all the money. All of it.
I mean, I've seen it happen before too. I think there was a Steelers complete onslaught with Steelers one week, but I think it's the 100th Millionaire Maker this week. So I think that's worked twice, maybe 3 times. So no one's doing it. If you want to try it, I can't imagine allocating my money to do that.
Yeah, I actually remember Bales talking about that Pittsburgh game when that player won the Millie Maker, and everyone was like, "Oh, this is such a terrible lineup. It has 6 Steelers in it." And to be honest, like from like more of a game theory perspective, like it kind of makes a certain amount of sense. Like if you think a team is, I mean, if by chance a team ends up scoring 50, 55 points, or something like that, and you're able to soak up all of those touchdowns, depending on some of the prices, like if you hit the right way, it almost increases your floor in some ways because you don't have to pick the right one.
So, I mean, this would be a nice to go back and look at. If you had just played Kansas City full-on stack so far this season, you'd be able to do it with like your Conleys of the world, just being super cheap prices. But let's say you played Mahomes, Hunt, Kelsey, and Hill in the defense, let's say, every single week. Do you think you'd cash more often than not this year?
I think the problem with it, even KC, the Rams, it makes a lot of sense, but I wonder what type of plays you'd be able to get around it, because you wouldn't be able to get the Saquons, you wouldn't be able to get the Gurleys, and like those were some of like the really big blow up plays have come from this year. So you really have to, for it to have completely worked out, you would have to get your 50-point game from KC, which is very doable, but you would also have to hit on some of your cheaper plays around it. But yeah, it would be interesting to go back and look at what your roster construction would look like on each of those weeks.
Tight ends, Travis Kelce, who we just mentioned, comes in as the highest priced tight end in a fantastic matchup up against the Ravens. He is $7,000. Bit pricey. George Kittle comes in right below him, at a $1,100 discount, $5,900. Then you have Rob Gronkowski, Jared Cook, Njoku, Ebron, Greg Olsen, Jimmy Graham. Now we're into the $3,000 range with Hooper Ingram, who we don't even know if he's going to play. Cameron Brate, Trey Burton, Kyle Rudolph, Uzma with Driscoll and potentially AJ Greenback. My main man, Chris Herndon, $3,200. Just roll that guy out every week. He's good for like 12 points every single week. And that's about it. But at the very top, like, what do we like? Give me an ownership guess on Eric Ebron. 90%, 99%?
Wow, you think it's going to be that high?
I
mean,
don't. He's probably going to be like 25. But like,
oh yeah, I think he's the chalkiest guy for sure. But I will say that was a big time, like big city transition that you just had going from the KC game stacks right into Travis Kelce. Like you might actually have a future in that whole consulting thing. So I might have to hit you up on that.
Listen, I'm good at guerrilla video. If you want to make videos on the cheap and not make them look terrible, you talk to Pat Mayo.
I'm with you, man. All right, so let's get the Kelce thing out of the way before we touch on Ebron, though, because this is the spot, like 32nd and DVOA against Oakland. Like, we don't need to even talk much about Kelce's routes, his yards per route. Like, all that stuff is great. High team total, everything sets up. But like these like unbelievable matchups for Kelce, like when's the last time that actually worked out? Maybe I have a lot of biases because these are the only times I ever really pay up all the way up at tight end. But at 7K, Kelce has to have an insane game for him to burn you, and you pay down for some of these other guys. So I don't know. I think Kelsey's a great tournament play. I don't think that I'll be one of the people that plays him on my main team or a cash game situation. But yeah, am I just totally biased because of some of these other great situations he's been on and underperformed?
Probably, but it just to pay up for 7,000 for Kelce in a week where you want to pay up at running back and try to go mid-range at receiver, that it's going to be tough to get to him. Like, you can leave him on the chopping block unless you're playing some sort of chief stack. Then you're probably going to want to have Travis Kelce in that. But I'm really interested in Kittle at 59, coming off the bad week, which was these tight end smash spots never do. Like, that's at least my headcanon on it as well. Whether that's true or not, I have no idea. The narrative in my mind is that every time these tight ends get into the spot where they're supposed to go bananas, they don't. And Kittle really should have had a giant game last week. He was either getting pass interfered with or quadruple covered. If Marquise Goodwin comes back against Seattle, at least, he's there to keep them honest, and you can't throw everything at Kittle.
Yeah, the Kittle narrative is something that I'm actually really interested in because I think people think he had like some type of terrible game, but his volume was actually really strong. So I think that one thing that you should always bring up in this situation is what is the Nick Mullins led offense really going to lead you to as far as touchdown opportunities. But so at 5,900, you look at him as more of a wide receiver. Like, I get it based on his volume for sure. But this is a week where I definitely think we have a ton of value at tight end, paying down a tight end, something I'm almost always trying to do. And then we do have Eric Ebron at 4,200, who I think is in a really great spot without Doyle, obviously.
Is there an ownership, like almost the same thing as the McCaffrey question? Is there an ownership percentage that Ebron can get to where you're going to be like, you know what? It's not worth it to play because if he busts, I have such an advantage on everyone else. And Njoku's right there at 4,300, $100 more. He could be pretty good this week.
Yeah, I actually love the Njoku pivot. I was going to, so at 4,300, like almost the same exact price point. Yeah, if Ebron ends up approaching the 30 to 35% ownership range, like tight end's a position where I definitely think there's a lot of value in kind of zigging where everyone else is kind of zagging. So Njoku's really interesting at 4,300. I'm not really sure what his ownership's going to be like because I think he could be kind of that sexy play that trends throughout the week that people are talking about. But it does make a lot of sense. Like, the game environment for Njoku is great. But I think I do definitely prefer going the Njoku route than the Landry route. Houston's 31st in DVOA against a tight end. So, like, the position, it sets up really well for Njoku to have a great game. I think he's super interesting.
So the guys below $4,000, obviously Cameron Brate came through with not a lot of volume last week. This game is projected for more points. They should be throwing more in this game. Obviously, there's no O.J. Howard. He comes in at $3,700. I always have a soft spot for my main man, Chris Herndon IV. Now up to $3,200. For a while, he was just like $2,700. He was like a free square for his 7 targets, 5 catches for 50 yards every single week. Then you pray that he finds the end zone. Probably not the best value coming off this week because I'm trying to find him. I can't even find him on this list. Where's my main man, Matt Lacoste?
There you go. That's the guy.
Is he the bare min?
He is the stone min at 2,500.
Play him then.
He's the guy. So here's one thing. So talking about tight end, and I've taken plenty of goose eggs at tight end this year, but Matt Lacoste actually has a catch. And I think every game this year, at least the last like 6 or 7 games, he has at least one catch. So you're not getting a goose egg. I probably just ruined that for everyone that's going to play him this week. But I think he actually has a relatively decent floor. I mean, 2,500. We do know about I can't. His name is escaping me right now, but the Denver tight end that went on the IR. So hopefully,
Jeff Heerman.
there you go. That's that guy. Yeah. So I mean, maybe a few more targets his way at 2,500 against Cincinnati, who's horrible. If you're on the Case Keenum train this week, pairing him with Matt Lacoste, I think he's the guy at 2,500 at the position. Like if everyone's going to play Ebron, I'm just going to play Lacoste probably and live with the result.
And I mean, you could technically play them both too. That would be actually a good way to differentiate your Eric Ebron lineups if you really wanted to. You could play Ebron at tight end. You could play Lacoste in the flex, and that way you can save all your money and pay up for whoever you want at all the other positions. If that's a construct that you don't hate, I don't love it, but I can see the validity behind it. And like you mentioned, that Case Keenum stack: Sanders, Lacoste, Case Keenum. Man, there you go. That's a millionaire maker winner right there, isn't it?
Yeah, I actually like the idea of having your stack be part of the way you pay down, because if you really hit on that correlation and you're paying up at other positions that we think are really good spots, volume spots, I think that makes a ton of sense. Not so much on the double tight end thing. I think that the roster spots of being able to put running backs in there is something that you don't really want to just give up for a punt play. But Lacoste at 2,500. I'm not sure how chalky he's going to be. It's hard to tell recording this on a Wednesday, but I would assume that he's going to be pretty popular.
The thing is, I really do think that Ebron pushes 30%, so I find it hard to believe that a $2,500 tight end would get up that high, because Kelsey's going to carry ownership. Yep. Kittle will carry a bunch. People will buy back into Gronk after having one really good week that he'll carry, I don't know, like 6% ownership, give Kelsey 10, that there's only so many plays that you can make. And Cameron Brake, justifiably so, should carry a bunch of ownership as well.
Yeah, Brate's still at 3,700 is interesting, especially because of his role. That was a play that I guess I was kind of kicking myself for last week. I ended up playing Kittle on my main team on DraftKings, which I
did exactly the same thing.
Yeah, so I mean, I still think Kittle was a great play. The usage that he saw, maybe kind of underwhelming. I probably should have downgraded him a little bit more for Mullins, but like the first thing that happens on the slate, it was probably 5 minutes after kickoff, as Brake catches that touchdown from Winston. I was like, oh, this is going to be a really fun day. But yeah, I mean, all the way down there at 3,700 in a game that we expect there to be a ton of points at the tight end position. One thing that I'm always trying to prioritize is a high team total, just because it's so driven by touchdowns. I definitely think that Cameron Brate at 3,700 is really interesting, especially if you think that a lot of the ownership is going to go to Ebron for 500 more.
And even looking back, just to finish on Matt Lacoste for a second, he played 47% of the snaps last week for Denver. Heerman ended up playing 75. So do you think it just works like next man up? Like when Butt went out, all of a sudden Heerman's playing all these snaps. Now that he's out, you now have Lacoste stepping into like 70 to 80% of the offensive snaps?
I'm always scared to project a role change, just the way that some coaches are. Like, let's look at even just in general, totally different situation, but looking at rational coaching. Like for some reason, Odell Beckham wasn't in the game plan last week against Philly.
I am convinced that the Giants figured it out at halftime. They had to talk, be like, listen, it's to our benefit to lose this game. So let's just do the opposite of what we should do, and then we'll lose.
Yeah, I would have appreciated the heads up on that one before I had 100% Odell last week. But anyways, that's what I'm trying to say is like trying to project what these coaches are going to do. So anytime it's a next man up situation, or we're just throwing the targets his way, is kind of scary. And I probably just mushed everyone that's going to play him thinking he has a decent floor. So if you want to lock in that goose egg, I'll be right there with you.
Defenses, before we get to the best stacks of the week. The highest priced defense is the Seahawks, and they're only $3,400. So there's only a price gap of $1,400 between the highest and the lowest. So you can have anyone you want realistically. So who do you want? Or is this still a situation just to pay down?
Yeah, I'm not playing Seattle. I get it against Mullins, but Seattle just doesn't pressure enough.
I don't like Seattle at all here. I just feel like they run the ball 70 times in this game, and there's just no fantasy points being scored.
I mean, if they end up being the top scoring defense, I would be shocked. I guess I saw their price and I was like confused. I had to like go back and make sure I had the right data in my spreadsheet. So 3,400 for them. Definitely not interested in that, especially with the Chicago Bears at 3,300 against this Giants team, who I already talked about how they're not going to be able to protect Eli. Eli has actually been decent under pressure this year as far as his turnovers and throwing interceptions, but I definitely think he's going to take some sacks. Third best matchup at the line of scrimmage. So at 3,300, definitely like Chicago if I'm paying all the way up.
I like Chicago as well, just because they have a great scoring defense too. That the fact that when they generate turnovers, it's a lot like the Ravens used to be. The Ravens had this really good defense, but once you got the ball into the safety's hand, whether it be Ed Reed or whoever, that these guys could actually return the ball. They were good returners. Chicago is seemingly set it up the same way as well. That once they get the ball in their hands, even if their defensive linemen pick it up on a fumble, they have a chance to score because they're looking for the end zone. That's always an underrated part of defense and special teams. Which teams can actually bring it back for the pick six? Beyond, I mean, pressure and facing volume is the number one thing that you really do want, but that's a little added bonus that you can chuck in there. The one problem I have with the Giants is they've really gone to these two tight end jumbo sets to max protect Eli, and it's really been working the last 3 weeks. He's not getting dropped and is pressured as much as he had been earlier in the year.
Yeah, that's an interesting comment about targeting defenses that are actually trying to score. That I'm not sure how I would quantify that, but I think that that's actually really sharp. But yeah, on the other side of that, like maybe there's an argument that they've been protecting a little bit better in these jumbo sets as well. It's something to look at. But Chicago, just the way that they've been pressuring this year, I still think that this is a spot where I expect them to be extremely successful.
Cash D, Broncos, $2,700.
I like the Broncos a lot. Another one that I'll mention all the way down there is the Kansas City Chiefs at 2,500. I mean, massive spread. That was, again, like I like that. Why is Kansas City 2,500 and the Seahawks are all the way up at 3,400? Doesn't make a lot of sense to me. So if we're just looking at game environment, game script, there's going to be a lot of passes from Derek Carr. We know that Derek Carr is terrible at the line of scrimmage, second best matchup for as far as pressure, because Oakland, not only can they not pressure, they can't protect on the other side of the ball. So I think anytime you get a massive spread like this, there's a couple teams that really stand out to me. Kansas City and Green Bay at the low end for me, but I'm interested in the Denver take.
Yeah, I like Green Bay as well. I guess the other one I would look to, that if everyone's going to pay for the Bears, or if people just see Seattle as the highest price and pay for them, the Bills are kind of interesting, but I kind of like the Titans here against the Jets. Just get in the face of Josh McCown. They're 7.5-point favorites at home. They have a very good pass rush, and I just don't know if McCown can take advantage of this. If it is McCown, if it's Darnold, even better.
Yeah, so we talked about some of those cheap Jets guys, and one of the data points there is how much the Jets have been throwing, third most in the entire league over the past 3 games. So I actually really like the idea of Tennessee at 3K, because I think they're at a price point where I think a lot of people will pay down. But yeah, if you get McCown, whoever it ends up being, as a massive home favorite, lower implied total, not so much worried about the implied total at defense, more looking at pressure and pass attempts and that sort of thing. But yeah, I think Tennessee's fine.
I guess the last one that I would even consider, I know everyone's really high on the Browns and how well they've been playing, but the Texans do get to the quarterback, and the Browns have given up 35 sacks this year, 24th in offensive line adjusted sack rate. That if you start pressuring Baker, he's not immune to terrible decisions. It's almost like Atlanta's defense against Lamar. Like, Lamar Jackson's made some brutal passes in his first 2 starts that they could have easily gone the other way for 6 very quickly.
Yeah, I play a lot of preseason on DraftKings, and watching Lamar try and throw the ball was just horrific on some of those preseason slates. So I'm actually shocked that I ended up playing him the other week and it worked out. But I'm with you on Houston, actually. I'd like Baker will take sacks. We know that. I have it as the 5th best matchup at the line of scrimmage. So I think that side of the ball is super interesting. Home favorite defense at 2,700. There's a lot of good defenses this week. There's been a couple weeks this year where it's been pretty clear. But I think ownership's going to be super spread out at defense right now.
Well, that's good. I mean, if anyone starts concentrating on one of the defenses, that just seems like a perfect recipe to fade those ones, because not one stands out above the other.
For sure. I mean, it's the position that you do want to try and be a little bit unique on. We've seen a lot of the chalk defenses fail this year. But I do think that one thing that I'm always trying to prioritize is paying down for pressure and for a good game situation when I can.
Yeah, and it does look like that Green Bay is probably the team this week for that.
Yeah. Green Bay is in my main team right now. It is early in the week for sure. But just the pressure that I think they're going to be able to get on Arizona, it pains me to say this about my Cardinals, but I hope they just continue losing so that we can start to build. We do have some decent pieces, but Josh Rosen will take sacks. He throws interceptions. I guess there's an argument that there's not going to be a lot of pass attempts in this game, but the one data point that has me on Green Bay more than anyone else outside of a cheaper price is that Rosen's been terrible under pressure this year, over 3.5 yards per attempt worse while under pressure, according to PFF. So massive home favorite. I think that they're the top play.
If you were looking for an absolute outside the box defense, the Jets dial up a lot of blitzes, and Tennessee can't block anyone.
I like that, I guess, because Mariota actually over the past year has taken the most sacks of anyone on the slate, 12.8%. So I think that's interesting. Not a ton of pass volume there. The pace isn't great, but if you're looking for off the board, 2,200, the price is right. A double-digit favorite, I was looking at the wrong one there, but they are massive dogs would be my main concern. Not a ton of points and passing volume in this game in general, but yeah, I understand. I mean, if he's going to take sacks, you get a pick six from the Jets at 2,200, you're rolling.
Well, it's funny, like even to talk about chalk defenses a little bit, everyone used the Bears on the Thanksgiving slate last week and they had that pick six. They still only scored 11 points, so it wasn't that great.
Yeah, and then I would imagine that their rosters were completely different than some of the other defenses that maybe scored 6 to 7 points, but they were 2,200 or whatever they were. So that's something you always have to think about. Like, what does paying up actually give me in terms of upside? But the main thing is, what did you have to sacrifice to get there?
Stacks, before we let you get out of here, Joe. Any team that you're looking at in particular, or any game that you think is just a must stack opportunity, is that Tampa Carolina game?
Yeah, that's the one I'm really looking at for stacks right now. So I think the Winston side of it is super interesting, and you don't even have to go all the way to Evans, in my opinion. I think maybe just grabbing Humphreys and Godwin together and just trying to capture that whole role, hopefully get the touchdowns with Godwin, some of the short intermediate stuff with Humphreys. I think that it's super valuable to pay down at your stacks and pay up at some of the positions that you really value. So that stack in general, only 14.1K between three players, I think is really interesting if you want to start with a little bit more value.
Yeah, I mean, for a game stack there as well, if you really wanted to overload on a game that has 50.5 projected points in it, you could go McCaffrey, potentially even like DJ Moore on one side of the ball, bring it back with Jameis, with Godwin, and either Humphreys or even Brait for that matter instead of Humphreys.
Yeah, I like the break call a lot too. There's so many options for Tampa Bay, so it might actually make sense to full on onslaught it so that you capture that upside, and then maybe bring it back with someone on the other side of the ball, like you mentioned, like McCaffrey or something like that. So I think that game really stands out from a lot of perspective, but I think it's going to be really popular as well. So I don't know how sneaky it'll be.
Well, there's one, now that I'm looking at it right now, the updated over-unders, KC and Oakland is up to 56, Detroit and the Rams are at 55. Like, it's outside of Aitman, like, is there anyone on Oakland you would realistically want to play?
Not really. That's the biggest kind of problem with that game stack in general is who do you run it back with on Oakland's? I don't know if there's really a ton to like for this team. Like I said, I think that they've kind of totally given up. You can make somewhat of an argument, I guess, for Jared Cook, but for me, it's going to be just paying down for Aitman and hoping that gets me to some other plays in my lineup.
And with the Rams and the Lions, is this a good matchup for Matt Stafford?
No.
Okay.
So I don't know. I guess I've been a little bit bias on getting burned by some of these wide receivers before, but this offense just hasn't looked very good. I always struggle with the Detroit play, especially at quarterback, because of how many plays that they run. So they've got them only trailing Cincinnati in offensive plays for this week. I definitely think that this is a game that could end up being somewhat of a trap, to be honest. We're just looking at a pure game environment. I think the Rams, sometimes you can look past that because of how efficient they've been. But the Detroit side of the ball is something that I'm super worried about for sure.
Is there any sneaky shootout game that you see? Two teams playing a super high pace that are coming in with sort of a marginally lower over-under than those three games?
The one that I really like actually is this Denver game. I've heard a couple people talk about it, but against Cincinnati, I think that one of the stacks that I was looking at is something like Case Keenum to Emmanuel Sanders, Cortland Sutton, maybe getting that three-way stack going. This is the team I have for the most plays, third highest game rank as far as pace. There are concerns at the line of scrimmage at both sides of the ball, but against the Cincinnati team that has been pretty much giving it up to anyone, I actually really like Case Keenum stacks if you want to start with a little bit more value.
So the two games that I'm looking at, just because of two high-paced teams, I know that you mentioned that Houston wants to run the ball a lot, and that could be true. They're not milking the clock when they're running the
Yeah,
ball at
true.
all, which is really strange. So you have Houston and Cleveland, both inside the top 11. Houston is 11th in terms of plays per second, so they both run a lot of plays. And then you have Jacksonville and Indy. Indy is number 1, Jacksonville is number 9, and who knows what Jacksonville's going to look like without their offensive coordinator, with a new quarterback, potentially, and no Leonard Fournette. Like, I don't know how that offense is going to look, but if Indy just starts posting points on them early, like they could run like 65, 70 plays in this game.
Yeah, both of these games are at the top of my list for pace and game environment. It's actually pretty interesting what you said about Lamar Miller, how they're not using the run game to kind of slow teams down, and that's the biggest difference between a team like them and a team like Detroit. So I would be pretty interested in Lamar Miller and then bringing back with some of the pieces we talked about in Cleveland. The Jacksonville Indy game, it seems like almost once a week there's like a game that just like on paper it looks like there should be scored points, but there's just like no one in the game I'm super interested in. So I think the Jacksonville game is like really hard to figure out, and it's going to be super important to figure out the running back situation, of course. But as far as like stacking up the Jacksonville side of the ball, it's kind of tough for me. It's basically trying to figure out who on Indy I'd be interested in. Probably someone like Ebron and Ty, something like that, and bringing it back with maybe Carlos Hyde or whoever you think is going to catch the ball, maybe Yeldon.
I think you mentioned the Cincinnati-Denver game, and I'm just looking at it right now that it's really tough to assess how the Cincinnati offense is going to look with Driscoll in, and if AJ Green comes back, is that going to help them? Is that not going to help them? How healthy is he going to be? But just if you look at total plays per second, Denver is 5th, Cincinnati is 4th overall. They're two very fast teams. However, when you look at them, Cincinnati is the fastest team when they're winning by 7 or more, and Denver is the slowest team in the league when they're up by 7 or more. So if you think that Denver gets up big, this game could slow down in a hurry.
Those type of splits are actually really interesting. So I should probably look at those a little bit more, because that's a pretty interesting data point. Like, so if you're on the Philip Lindsay train, I mean, I love Philip Lindsay this week, but if they get ahead, I almost would prefer that since he can score some points for this game to completely shoot out. And then you're relying on this quarterback to do that for you. You're relying on Driscoll. So it's kind of scary from that perspective. But I do love so many pieces of this Denver offense this week. And a lot of them are priced at really solid price points. So it's hard to get away from this game for me.
Yeah, I think it is worth bringing it back with someone on Cincinnati if you do think that's like if you want the maximum amount of volume in this game. Like if they're within 6 points, both these teams 8th and 4th in terms of plays per second. So if it's going to be close, they're both going to be super speedy as they go along. That it would be worth it that if Denver's scoring points, that you would almost want to have someone on the Cincinnati side of the ball, because in order for the pace to keep up, they would have to score points too.
Yeah, you've got to be able to tell yourself a story and justify having all this Denver exposure. And that story tells you that either Cincinnati gets ahead so that the pace continues to be high pace, like you mentioned, in that split. So yeah, having someone like Tyler Boyd at 6,100, I think that for this game to completely shoot out, you definitely need Cincy to score some points. If they get ahead, even better.
Yeah, if there's no AJ Green, and I do think that he'll end up playing, I think John Ross is the cheap piece of that game. So you could have your Denver stack that's super cheap, John Ross who's super cheap, and then you can pay for every chalk guy who's super expensive at every other position if you want to.
Yeah, all in on Denver on the road. What could go wrong?
Yeah, of course. Get them away from Mile High. They're always great. That's what I hear.
Yeah, exactly.
All right, Joe Holka, pimp the Twitch channel again. Let us know about your schedule, because you're doing a lot of live streaming, viewer interaction. We want to get people on there. Just don't go. You go at 11 on Sundays, right?
Yeah, so Sundays I'm starting at 9 Eastern time. CSU Ram joins me on Sunday mornings. It's been a lot of fun doing this stuff over on Twitch throughout the week. Most of my content is going out on YouTube, doing a Tuesday review over on Twitch. I enter the $1,500 tournament on DraftKings every week, single entry tournament. So get a lot of really good interaction. People are pretty interested in looking at some of the higher stakes lineups as well. It's been a lot of fun, actually, like doing a ton of content since I've been in the industry, but actually feel so much more involved in the community, actually doing some of these things over on Twitch. So definitely come join us on Sunday mornings with CSU Ram for sure.
Yeah, twitch.tv/Joe Holka. Just remember, at 10 a.m. Eastern time, tune out of Joe's show, tune into my show, which is on at 10 a.m. Eastern time. Sorry about that. We're going head to head here.
Yeah, we'll move it right over. It's fine. You'll get about a half an hour, 45 minutes with me, and then go right over to Pat. That's how it works.
So you get the good content with you and Pete, then you can tune in for me and Cuss to give you the worst advice of the week. It really works out. You can weigh them against each other and be like, oh, well, Pat and Joe disagree on this. I'll decide with Joe. That'll win me money. How have you been doing in the $1,500 single entry anyway?
Super well. So started off, had a good week one. Actually, I've lost the last 4 weeks and still up like 12, 13K or so on the season in that tournament. So locked up profitability pretty early in the year, which took the pressure off a little bit. It probably could have gone horribly wrong. So yeah, 4 weeks in a row, not cashing. So hopefully we can turn it around this week.
So does that change how you construct your lineups? Like, do you think of each individual slate as independent from one another? Because Al once told me that when he plays the Millionaire Maker or when he plays a season of DraftKings, he's looking to hit it big once in 17 weeks, and that pays for 3-4 years of playing on NFL. So if you get up early in this tournament, does that make you want to take more chances in these tournaments, or does it not affect your process at all?
I think I look at it as kind of a each week is independent, but I mean, I'd be lying if I wasn't saying like, so winning that tournament, I think it was in week 4. It definitely changed. I mean, at least lets me sit down and take a breath a little bit. I'm with Al though. Like you need to, in my opinion, NFL is all about hitting that big score at least once a year and surviving, honestly. So with a high tournament approach like I have, we can have kind of stretches like this, 4 weeks in a row, not cashing a tournament like this is totally normal. But the one thing that I can at least take some solace in is that what I like to do is look at the entire season. So what can I expect to do in this tournament from week 1 to week 20, however long I end up playing it. And I think that I'll come out ahead. At least if I have 1 or 2 hits in there, it kind of will offset all the losses, even though it is a pretty high buy-in tournament.
If you were not playing with the sort of stakes that you are, let's say you only had $100 to invest every week or $200 to invest, what do you think the best way to divvy up that bankroll would be? If it was you, I'm not saying it's the optimal strategy. If it was you, would you play single entry tournaments or even make 1 or 2 lineups and put them into, I mean, do you play a ton of cash games?
Yeah, so I'll start here. So I think one thing that I think a lot of people have enjoyed about the Twitch stream going over this tournament is it's not so much about the stakes that it's at. One of the things that I really prioritize in tournaments is playing some of the smaller fields. Doesn't necessarily have to be single entry, but that's what I prefer. So this tournament has under 100 people in it, and you just have a much better opportunity to finish at the top, playing with what you think is either optimal or close to optimal. So I'm basically rolling out technically somewhat of a cash line team, but it's more or less just a slight correlation tweak or roster construction tweak for me. So I'm not taking a ton of like unnecessary chances, not doing a ton of game stacking in this tournament. So I definitely think that it's really interesting for people to see that you don't have to just look at these massive prize pools, and try and attack some of these smaller fields is something you can do without a massive score. So I think some people have really, that have been on the Twitch streams, have really enjoyed kind of the thought process on that small field strategy that I'm going with. As far as game selection goes, one thing that I don't play a ton of cash games, but one thing that I do is I hedge a little bit with double ups. And I think of it a little differently than some people. So we mentioned surviving in NFL. One thing that I think is a good way to do that is do half of your buy-in for your main tournament. So let's say at the $1,500, actually play double ups for half of that. So that if for some reason I miss the cash line, 2 weeks this year, I've missed the cash line in this $1,500 tournament by under a point. It's been a lot of fun. But yeah, one thing that saved me in those weeks is that I had half my action in double ups. So cashed all the double ups, and then you survive with maybe like a small loss and you move on. So it kind of it helps the losses a little bit if you can just hedge your cash games with double ups, in my opinion. I know a lot of people are going to say play head to heads, but this is what's worked for me.
I know that the Millionaire Maker is $100 this week, but generally speaking, it's $20. If you had $20 and you normally throw it in the Millionaire Maker, do you think it's a better idea to take that $20 and put it in, even if it's just one of these smaller $20 tournaments that only has like 20 people in it, if you want to sustain yourself week to week?
There's one thing that I want to make very, very, very clear is that you do want to have some sort of upside if you're playing these small tournaments. So any lineup I make is going to go in the Millie Maker. I made one mistake, one massive mistake or potential mistake is one of the playoff weeks last year. Didn't have my main team in the biggest tournament. Had it in a bunch of small field stuff that ended up winning, but didn't have it in the big stuff. So even if you're rolling out just $20, make sure you get that team in the biggest $1 to $3 tournament. So if your team's going completely nuts, you won't feel terrible if you land on a 0.1 percentile team. So I think that outside of that, your main tournament strategy has to be a tournament that at least is in the realm of possibilities of winning for me. So for me, that means targeting a field size that's under 150 people.
Joe Holka. Check him out on Twitter at Joe Holka, contributor to DK Live as well, and twitch.tv/Joe Holka. Thanks for being on the line, dude.
Appreciate it, man. Love to do it anytime.
All right. I'm Pat Mayo. You can follow me on Twitter, Instagram, and the Facebooks at the PME. Subscribe to the Pat Mayo Experience audio podcast, iTunes, Stitcher, Podbean, wherever you download audio podcasts, you can find the Pat Mayo Experience. And this week, if you leave a review on any one of those audio sites, leave your DraftKings handle, 5-star review, something you like about the show, you are in a draw for $20 DK dollars. Winner announced on Monday's show. Or if you just want to get in the video version, smash that like button. That is step 1. Step 2 would be leave your DraftKings handle in the comment section along with your favorite play at running back below $4,500 on the Week 13 main slate. Check out the cheat sheet on Thursday on DraftKingsPlaybook.com or DKPlaybook.com. I mean, I think the DK stands for DraftKings. At least that's what I assume. I'll ask the higher-ups and see what they say. Anyway, you just focus on winning bucks this week, all right? I'm Pat Mayo. I'll see you next time.
Pat Mayo Experience! Experience!